Hello, welcome to Sideways. Have you ever felt bitter or resentful towards someone who hurt you and thought that hurting them back was the only way to feel better? Were you surprised and disappointed to find that even if you did make them pay, it didn't make you feel better at all? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Why dealing with our emotional pain is often counterintuitive. Also, Martin and I debate the merits of driving in various footwear. He has a cautionary tale about ordering calendars online, and we reminisce about creosote, letting go of resentment. All right?
Yes, mate. Yeah, how about you?
I'm all right, thanks. Am I late?
No, about right, isn't it?
I think so. I was having trouble with my password manager.
Oh, are you?
That's not a person, by the way.
Yeah, not like Matt Hancock having trouble with his personal assistant.
I don't think you should be bringing that up, should you, this morning?
Not really. No, we don't want to get into any political shenanigans, do we?
Although I suppose that whole ballpark is probably related to the subject that you want to talk about this morning, isn't it?
It could be. It could be.
Yeah.
But
anyway, before we get to that,
okay.
What was I going to ask you? Yeah, where do you stand on driving in flip-flops?
Oh no, terribly dangerous.
Right. So you'd consider it dangerous, but do you think would you be of the opinion that it is against the law?
I don't know really. I haven't really thought about it. Should it be against the law? Probably.
Right. Do you think it is against the law?
I honestly don't know. I don't know if it is or not. I mean, sometimes I drive in bare feet.
Yes. Well, it's funny because we were having that. I've just been having that conversation this morning over some blueberry pancakes.
Okay.
That's 2 weeks running. I've had pancakes for Sunday breakfast.
Yeah. You're indulging yourself.
Yeah. And we were talking about, we were wondering whether it was in fact illegal to drive in flip-flops because, as you say, it is quite dangerous. And both Tom and I agreed that we prefer to drive in bare feet. You know, I think probably driving bare feet, you must have the maximum amount of control, surely, haven't you? I
would have thought so. I like to feel the clutch and feather it, and you know, it just seems to have much more control over.
I've heard that said about you.
But I just at the back of my mind, I've got a feeling it's illegal to drive in bare feet, but I don't know.
You see, we looked it up. And it isn't illegal. It's not. There's no legal requirement to have shoes on. In fact, you can drive with bare feet or in flip-flops. But I'll tell you, the other reason that I wanted to bring this up is that when Tom was searching for whether or not it is illegal to drive in flip-flops, he found another search that had been quite popular in the spring of 2020, which was, is it illegal to drive in pyjamas?
I can't imagine anyone would want to search that, would they? I mean, I can't imagine that would be legally enforceable. Have you got pyjamas on? You can't get in that car there.
There was a massive spike in searches for that particular question in March 2020.
All right. People would stop getting dressed, didn't they, during the start of COVID, and just if they needed to pop to the local supermarket or jump in their car in their gym jams. Yeah.
That's terrible though, isn't it? I mean, I think I'd lose my self-respect if I went out to the shops in my pyjamas. I mean, just imagine me walking Daisy on the heath in my pyjamas.
Well, I don't actually own any pyjamas. I would never fall foul of that particular law if it came in.
Yeah, you'd have to be searching, is it okay to drive naked?
Yeah, you're probably not allowed to do that.
You must be allowed to drive. What do you mean? You must be allowed to drive naked. Why wouldn't you be allowed to drive naked?
Well, in case you break down, you have to run along the hard shoulder like a streaker.
You want to pick people up. You wouldn't want to drive naked if you're a taxi driver or a bus driver.
Not really. It'd be a little bit off-putting, wouldn't it?
Anyway, how come you've got us off track like that?
I don't remember that it was me that actually drove the conversation that way. But just something before we do start. I just wanted to mention that. I remember last Sunday, when this goes out, it'll be the Sunday before was Father's Day.
Yep.
And I had independently talked to my daughters, and they both mentioned how difficult it had been to buy a card for me that wasn't alcohol related.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, I know. He said there were plenty of football ones, but most of them also had the sport sort of inextricably linked with alcohol as well. I mean, it was very easy in the past for them because alcohol very much defined me. Throw football into the mix, and the choice for them at that point was endless. But it just seemed a shame once again, that celebration is depicted as always being dependent on imbibing.
Yeah. I suppose that's interesting. I'd never really considered that, but I suppose the other route they could have taken, they could have bought one of those cards with a blank inside with no message and created their own message. So they could have, bought you a picture of a nice the hay wain or something.
They could have done. It depends. I mean, I think Emily, I think she got hers off of Moonpig or something for me, so she could scroll through and find the appropriate one. But I know if she's lucky, she put the right coding. Because a friend of mine, whose mum, she's quite elderly, she's in her 80s. She wanted to buy a calendar online. She scrolled through and put the wrong code in. Instead of getting views of Knaresborough, she got a death metal calendar. So she had that for a year hanging on her up in her kitchen. Not quite the same, is it?
Oh, that's fantastic.
Anyway,
you shouldn't have a coding system where views of Knaresborough goes next to death metal, should you? It's September. Oh, it's Slayer this month.
I don't think the good thing about that is her eyesight is that poor. She put the wrong code in, so she probably can't see the calendar anyway. So every cloud. Anyway, I don't want to get sort of resentful about the situation about my children not being able to find the right cards.
Is that a segue?
Hey, you spotted that one. It wasn't very subtle, was it?
Not really, no. So come on, what do you want to talk about?
Well, it is about the heading for my notes was letting go of resentments. Yeah. And it's something that crops up so regularly in groups that it's a sort of a surprise that we haven't dealt with it before. And I'm sure that I know we get quite a number of listeners who don't have addiction issues either. And it's something that many people will have issues with. And it's holding on, the problems we have when we hold on to resentments and long-term grudges.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I think you're right. I think it isn't just people with addiction issues. I think we all, from time to time, have difficulty with that, don't we?
We do. I remember talking to back in my financial services days. I used to deal a lot with solicitors, and I remember one guy I spoke to who dealt just with divorce. That's all he specialised in, and he said that resentment drove 90% of the clients to his door, which is quite significant, isn't it? Really. I remember, and that resonated with me all those years ago, and it still sits with me now. I think, oh yeah, that's in a situation like that, there's a lot of resentment on both sides often, isn't there? I mean, divorces are rarely straightforward. There are some resentments that get built up either before the divorce or, in fact, during the divorce proceedings, which can be quite significant.
Yeah, it's funny, really, because in those instances, in situations of divorce, you quite often find that the final outcome of all of the resentment that exists is inevitably pain and difficulty on both sides on a human emotional level, and frequently financial ruin.
Yeah, absolutely right. I expect. I hope Matt Hancock's got himself a good divorce lawyer, because he needed to see one soon. I don't want to bring him up again.
You can't let it lie, can you? You can't let it go. Where were we? Yes. So I think that is an example. Probably when you think about the difficulty of letting go of resentments, that is a kind of obvious example. We probably all know people that have been in that sort of situation. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure. And I know in addiction circles, I've heard people mentioning that simmering resentments have helped. When they look back, it sort of helped to trigger their descent into substance abuse, or that it can stop them from going into recovery in the first place. But it's also, we find it can be a major cause of relapse as well. So it's quite a big topic.
Right. So just taking that observation.
Yeah.
So you've got real examples of people for whom resentment has led them to addiction, has prevented them from going into recovery,
and has relapse. So if ever you needed evidence that there's something dysfunctional going on there when we find it impossible to let go of resentment, then that's a pretty key indication, isn't it?
Because it's right across the spectrum of the recovery or pre and post recovery community. Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was going to say, I mean, often you can have resentments in all areas, but it seems particularly, it crops up most regularly, it's when, surrounding other people's actions and how we struggle to forgive them or struggle to get by what has happened. Yeah. Obviously, there are other implications, as you mentioned earlier on, in divorce, such as finance, etc. But it tends to be other people's actions that the resentments seem to dig into.
Yeah, I think really it comes from a misunderstanding of how healing occurs here, because you can have a situation where you feel that somebody has treated you badly, done you wrong, disrespected you, hurt you. And it seems as if our kind of instinctive response to that is, well, I'm going to feel better if I get back at them. I'm going to feel better if I get even, or if I do something similarly unkind, or if I hurt them in the same way. So on one level, there's a kind of logic to that. It feels like, oh, well, if I get even, then I can let go of it. But the problem is, that's not the way our emotions work. We don't feel better when we get even, because what we're really doing is if someone has treated us badly or disrespectfully, by doing the same thing, all we're doing is moving to that same kind of destructive emotional level. So we never feel better doing that.
No, that's an interesting point. And I just want a little bit of a quote here from Buddha, if you don't mind. He says that holding on to resentment and anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I mean, do you find, the people you deal with yourself and their resentment that build up, it sort of allows these negative thoughts and feelings to take over and hijack your emotions, doesn't it? And you start to think and act irrationally, which rarely ends up with a positive result, does it?
No, it is. I do see it a lot, and it's really hard to help people move away from that mindset. I mean, obviously, I can't say anything to people or do anything with people that makes them think differently. But we do tend to get very kind of stuck and wedded to that idea of needing vengeance, needing to get our own back. And the part of the problem, I think, is that it's very difficult for people to grasp the notion that, negative emotion never makes us feel good. And I know I've said that before on here, but it's an eternal truth. You can never feel good about being unkind or being hurtful or being vicious or being vengeful. In the moment you might say, oh, that's good, I feel like I've got my own back. But it isn't a route to emotional balance and tranquility. Never.
No, I've known a lot of people that spend a lot of time and energy on almost planning revenge, and then it becomes this obsession. And I know, and especially if you've got addiction issues at the same time, that anxiety which comes with perhaps planning it and not being able to carry it out, and then just indulging further in your drug of choice makes things a whole lot worse. But it is the time and energy spent on that could be spent elsewhere in healing the situation, rather than pouring oil onto the flames of it, as it were.
Yeah, as emotions, fear and anger are often emotions that, if mishandled, are very destructive. Our challenge then is to use that anger in a way, to channel that energy in a way that is positive for us. And of course, to use that energy to be destructive back is not a way of using the energy positively. Even though at the moment it feels as if it might be. Yes, I'm going to enjoy seeing you squirm when I do this to you, but afterwards it doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't. And I think resentments as a whole, when I was researching this, when you type into the Google search bar, resentments and addiction, I didn't think I was going to get a great deal up there, but it was absolutely filled with stuff. And I think, we touched on it earlier on about my own personal experiences, people in groups, of how it affects their whole well-being. But there was a blog that I was reading, and I just wanted to read a small extract from it, if I may. Are you happy for me to do that?
Yeah, please do.
It's quite good. It's only short. It doesn't take long. And it goes like this. When I'm feeling resentful, I'm full of righteous indignation, self-pity and anger. I see the past through a distorted lens that removes personal accountability, allowing me to believe that I'm merely a helpless victim of my own choices. Life itself seems unfair, like everyone else is winning while I sit here feeling like a loser. The longer I bathe in my resentment, the stronger the feelings become, and eventually my resentments eat me alive, leading me back to alcohol, drugs, and addiction.
I mean, that's,
which sort of sums up the circle I was talking about earlier on, really, how that can it self-perpetuates and it makes things an awful lot worse, and then you go back to your drug of choice, and then and the whole cycle starts again.
Yeah. It does describe that perfectly. And the other thing it describes perfectly is what it's like to cast yourself as a victim.
Yeah.
So the other thing, the thing that we know about being a victim or casting yourself as a victim in any situation is there's no way out of it, because by definition, if you're a victim, you're waiting for something else to happen. You're waiting for someone else to do something so that you can be released from being a victim. And that's why taking up that kind of victim position is such a destructive place to stand, because you are effectively you're removing all of your own power. So when you're vengeful, when you're waiting on seeing the impact of your actions being destructive to someone else, that's a terribly debilitating position to put yourself in.
Yes, it goes back to that point, really. If you're seeing yourself as a victim and then you seek revenge and carry out revenge, and you sort of make that other person a victim, it doesn't make you less of a victim, does it? You're still sick with the same, whatever happened to you before is still there, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the example that you cited before about marriage breakdown, and obviously that is a place where you often see this sort of vengeful behaviour. Sometimes you see when people have split up, one really wants to drag the other over the coals. And then there is a great deal of resentment and bitterness about that. And there's a retaliation, you try and fight back. So all of that anger is going round and round and round, and all of the energy in that anger is being used by person A to try and destroy person B. At some point, both of those people, if they want to lead a happy and sustainable life, they're going to have to find a different way of using that anger, and they're going to have to find a way of using that anger to make their own lives better. So I think this idea that by being destructive to other people, we make our own lives better is a terribly dangerous, destructive myth.
So, I mean, and I agree with all that, and I've witnessed it personally. But how do we sort of frame, and deal with these resentments? Does it all resolve around forgiveness?
Yes, I mean, in a sense, it comes down to forgiveness. But the problem with forgiveness is that people find the word a struggle. Defining it is a struggle for people. The idea of forgiving someone who's deeply hurt you, I think, in some respects, is a longer road than recognizing that by not letting something go, you're hurting yourself. But I think it's sometimes easier to think when you're in that position about what is it that you need, and is holding on to this resentment, is fighting back, is trying to be destructive to someone else actually helping you. And when I'm working with people, that's the thing that I tend to focus on. If people come in, as they do sometimes, week after week, and they're talking about this person that's hurt them and what they're planning to do and what they're hoping to do and what they hope happens to them, I think it's worth having a conversation with that person about is this making you feel good? Because it doesn't look like it is. It doesn't always work, but sometimes when people are confronted with the reality of their own emotional landscape, when they're in this kind of constant cycle of vitriol and aggression, most people have to acknowledge and face the fact that what they think is going to make them feel better is actually not making them feel better at all.
When I was looking at, when I was researching this, the ways to deal, again, looking at ways to deal or to frame these resentments and how we move forward with it. There's several points that come up that I wanted to sort of discuss with you and see what you thought of them, because some I'm not quite sure I agree with, and some I think, well, perhaps that's got some merit. The first point was to define it, to define the resentment, and it said on that point was talk to a therapist, obviously a good one, or a friend, or write it down. Write it in a letter you never send. Which we did, during my sort of rehab course, when we were sort of breaking up with alcohol effectively, which was, and any resentment you had to what the alcohol or your drugs had done to you. So that was, I quite liked that. I don't know how you feel that, but defining it first would be the first step to dealing with it.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, I'd say there's merit in doing all three of those things, because when you're trying to work out your own emotional state about something, I don't think you can do too much work on it. So you can go and talk to a therapist. The benefit of talking to a therapist, of course, is that they don't have any other stake in your life. So they're, in that sense, completely impartial. You can be completely as you are, talk about how those feelings truly are inside you. So there's a benefit in that. Talking to someone that you trust, that is a friend, obviously they have a different perspective on you, and that can be helpful as well, because they might understand you in a kind of a different way. And writing it down in either a journal or a letter that you don't send is also really good. One of the great benefits of that is you are getting, just in the physical act of writing, you're getting something emotional out from inside of you onto a bit of paper, which you can then, when you were in rehab, you went and burnt them, didn't you? But you can do whatever you like with them. I think the main issue there is make sure you don't send them. The reason they're never to be sent is because they're not for anyone else. And that's one of the things to remember about resentment. Your resentment, it's not really about that other person. It's about something you're struggling with in you, something you can't get past in yourself. Yeah,
right. Again, going back to the forgiveness part of it, I mean, forgiveness is not something we do for other people, is it? We do it for ourselves to help us to move on.
Exactly. But a lot of people take a long time to come to that realization.
Yeah. And again, one of these points which sort of feeds on from that, really. And again, it's more down the lines of, when you've got a relationship that's broken up and you've gone through a divorce and that sort of thing, was sort of breaking up with your resentment, which we touched upon there with the letters, etc. But no, they said get rid of reminders that would of that particular person. For example, when I come back from detox centre and started doing my rehab, I was told get rid of the glasses that are in your house that remind you of your drinking, and shift your furniture around to make it like come back to a new place, and change the chair, move it around so you're not sitting in the same chair that you used to drink your alcohol in, and all these sort of things. So you're sort of breaking up with alcohol, and same with resentment. You break up with your resentment. So you remove some of the items in your life, either physically or emotionally, that remind you of how strong that emotion was.
Yeah, that's another good one. There's a lot of research to show that habit disturbance, which is what you're talking about there, is a really effective way of breaking a cycle of behaviour. So whether you're doing things physically, like getting rid of reminders or changing furniture or whatever else, one of the things that people find very, very difficult to get rid of in terms of getting rid of resentment with regard to relationships is that they keep stalking their ex. You keep looking them up. You keep looking at, finding them on Instagram, see if they're with someone new or whatever it is. That is absolutely deadly. And there's this, and one of the reasons people do it is because they're hurting, and they can, and it's easy, but it's so destructive, so destructive. It just takes you down into a terrible dark spiral. And so, that would be the specific that I would add to that one, which is, yes, of course, break up with your resentment, but don't, keep opening the wound for yourself.
Which social media does a great job in that, doesn't it?
Well, it's a great facilitator for that, isn't it? I don't think we can't blame social media. What we're doing is we're using social media as a way of keeping in touch with something that creates enormous pain for us. So,
exactly.
You should stop.
The next point I wanted to talk to you about, which, again, I'm sure you had some thoughts on, was about embracing the grudge and learn from it rather than it just taking up space in your life.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do you like that one?
I do, because that is effectively, I think, another way of saying use the energy that comes from your anger.
Yeah.
That's, if you embrace your upset and your hurt and your anger, that what that means is you're accepting that it is a part of you, and you're also accepting that you need to find a new way of using it. When someone's hurt us, it is very important for us to face that emotion if we have an intent to get through it. because otherwise it just sits there unresolved.
Yeah, it does. And a point that came up, in fact, we were discussing this yesterday. We had an open air meeting in Moat Park yesterday, and we're talking, because often I will talk about what I'm going to be talking about in the podcast, etc. And one of the points we were talking about was exactly about resentments. And one of the points that we were talking about was switching shoes with the source. So trying to understand where they're coming from as well, because it's very easy to get embroiled in your own thought process when you've got a resentment. Try and look at it from their point of view, from the other side, to see if you can get some sort of levelling up. It help you perhaps come to terms with why they're acting towards you in a certain way.
Yeah, I think that's also a really important one, because the benefit you potentially get from that is that you can start to understand that when someone behaves in a certain way, there's something beneath their behaviour. So again, going back to that example of a broken relationship, whether it be a marriage or anything else, if you feel like you're being badly treated by somebody, it's important to ask yourself, how does that person feel they've been treated by you?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've got to look at both sides, and quite often you'll find that sort of nasty, destructive, resentful behaviour is coming from hurt, coming from a place where that person feels injured by you, and then we kind of come back to that question about, well, who's going to end this cycle then? Who is going to be big enough and mature enough in the end to say, okay, I recognise that we're both knocking lumps out of each other here. I'm going to stop now, both because I want to get on with my life and lead a more enjoyable, sustainable life, but I also want to release you to do the same. Yeah,
I think that also something that came up was about the sort of language we can use around these resentments, especially if you continue to use sort of mean or unfavourable phraseology around that person you've got a resentment towards, because that sort of just strengthens and reinforces your hatred, doesn't it? So stop doing that. Obviously you're not going to start praising though, but stop reinforcing the negativity towards them. I think, again, to help perhaps redress the balance a little bit.
Yeah, that is connected to another really important point about conflict with other people in relationships or marriages or whatever, and that is that some of the worst conflicts I ever see between couples is where the couple are more interested in telling the other person what they feel, what the other person feels, rather than they are in owning their own emotion. So instead of having this kind of compulsion to say to someone, you did this, you did that, you did something else, it's much better if we're able to say, I feel, I experience, my experience from this, or my feeling from this is such and such, because you can't be wrong about how you feel, but you can definitely be wrong about other people's motives or how other people feel. And when we constantly make assumptions about why people did what they did and why they're acting like they are acting, the likelihood is that we just fan the flames of the fire and make it worse. So if you can own your own emotion rather than telling other people what they feel, then that is also a very positive step.
Yeah, and again, a very important point. You're right. But something that, again, crops up sometimes is when we almost use ourselves as a conduit for other people's anger. We channel the anger and resentment of others. We join in with their anger, even though we perhaps don't know anything about their situation. Very easy, isn't it, to side with that person that's telling you a story, and then you have that same sort of resentment towards this third party that perhaps you don't even know. But it's very easy to join the gang, isn't it, on that side of the resentment, and that can make you feel and act differently as well.
Yeah, I think we do that because it's kind of a dysfunctional way of showing solidarity with somebody.
Yeah.
But when that kind of comes back to something about the kind of nature of true friendship, I think the friends that we really value are the friends that will call us out when they think we're not looking at something with the right outlook. So if someone says, oh, this person did this to me and they did that to me and they're an absolute bastard and I want to get them back, when you jump on the bandwagon of that, then you're missing the opportunity to say, well, what happened then to make them behave like that? What happened in your relationship? It's important for us to remember when a relationship fails, it takes two people to create that. Now, it might be that one person does most of the damage, but I think just automatically making the assumption that there's only, one side to the story is dangerous.
It is, and I think those of us that have had addiction issues, sobriety gives you time to reflect on the enormous damage that you do in a relationship and to those people around you. So it's rarely we walk away and think, I haven't done anything wrong when something breaks down and things go wrong, because in many cases, we have been quite a large part of the story. So it's quite, but you don't see it at the time. When you're in the madness, you don't really see that. But it does take that period of sobriety, which gives you time to reflect on how things have panned out in your life. I think it's quite valuable, and it does set you up on a much more even keel, and you get more humility and you get more understanding of those people around you. So I think it gets to that point where in sobriety for me, I was perhaps, rather than being resentful for what had happened, but being grateful for what had happened to me in the past.
I could see that coming. You telegraphed that so far ahead. It was ridiculous.
It was like a cross-field ball, wasn't it? As a defender, you're going to easily intercept it.
Yeah. Before we get to gratitude, just something on what you were just talking about there, which is the importance. We've talked through this episode about how to deal with resentment you feel for other people, but it's also important to let go of any resentment you feel towards yourself. So come on then, gratitude.
Gratitude list. Well, I think one that's always on my gratitude list, but perhaps I haven't mentioned it on these podcasts, is
grapes.
No, not grapes. No, something much more significant. Having lovely daughters.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice.
I mean, they were a real motivation for me in the early stages of my recovery. Is the reason they were the reason I wanted to get better, and I think obviously having children yourself, you know what it's like. You know how totally emotionally involved you are with your children. There's nothing that comes ever even close to that. Just having daughters that I've now built a relationship with, which is full of pride on my behalf of how they've turned out, and I'm sure they've got a level of pride in the way that I've been able to beat my demons and get back to the point where I am now. So yeah, they're always going to be on my gratitude list, but I think sometimes it's just worth repeating. So Emily and Lizzie, yeah, you're always on my gratitude list.
Very nice. So after that, I'm kind of wishing I went first with my. Now it's going to seem a little bit insignificant. This week you've come out with something so weighty that when I tell you that what I'm grateful for this week is a freshly creosoted fence. That's good.
Yeah, but it's all up there, mate. It's all worthwhile. I like the smell of a newly creosoted fence.
It's funny you should say that, because that is exactly what I'm grateful for. It was really what I'm grateful for is olfactory recall, which is a smell reminding you of something. When I was walking the dog the other day, I was coming back down through the hedges from the heath, Yeah,
I do.
Yeah. And I passed a bit of fence that had been freshly creosoted, and I was literally taken back to my childhood, 12 or 13 years old, going up through those hedges on my bike, up to the heath, buying a hot dog from the little cafe that was up there with the creepy man who used to serve in there, and perhaps a Zoom, and then going off for a little game of putting.
Yeah.
Back there. And it was fantastic. It was literally like I was there in that moment. So I think sometimes those little experiences we have, we talk about gratitude a lot, but the thing that really made that powerful was noticing something like that, being kind of open to that experience of just smelling a smell and then allowing it to kind of transport you to another time in your life.
What did you have a phrase for that? What did you call it?
Olfactory recall.
Olfactory.
Olfactory. OL factory recall.
Okay. Yeah, I've never heard. Is that a Latin phrase, or where's that stem from?
I think olfactory means it's about your sense of smell, isn't it?
Okay. I mean, with creosote, I do love that smell. I mean, I think the reason we don't smell it so often now is because there's different products available which have superseded creosote. Creosote is still an old-fashioned way of dealing with it. But I remember me and my two brothers regularly would put on the ends of paintbrushes and would creosote in the fences out in the back garden, up and down either side. We used to get in terrible state with it because it's quite a corrosive material, really. But yeah, the smell was just was just lovely. Because we also had to do it then in conjunction with their neighbours, because you used to seek through the gaps in the fence and to start to creosote their side. And so my dad would say, well, go around and do theirs then. So we'd end up doing theirs as well. It used to be a terribly long job, full of resentment for that.
I didn't realise. I mean, as I say, it was one of those smells that came up. I thought, God, I haven't smelt that for so long now. But it was a moment of joy.
Anyway, should we move on to the Spotify search this week?
Yeah, go on.
When I put resentments in, again, loads of tracks came up. One from Wings, actually. It was on the old Venus and Mars album, which was quite a big seller in its day.
Yeah.
As you may recall, it was they're never particularly. I don't think I've got any Wings albums in my collection.
You haven't got Band on the Run?
I had that on cassette. See, when it first came out.
Counts, doesn't it? Counts if you got it on.
But I can't find it now. I don't know where it is.
It'll be in. Just look under W in your collection.
No, it'd be in landfill somewhere because it got chewed up in my cassette player.
Can you wind it back with a pencil like we used to do in those days?
We did, but once it becomes creased and then eventually snaps, there's nothing much you can do about it. I tried. Did you ever try and mend it with sellotape and that sort of thing? It used to ruin.
My brother had a splicing kit for cassettes, so he could actually fix them. But sometimes the tape used to get stretched, didn't it? And it would be like the band on, which could kind of spoil the enjoyment a little bit.
I'll tell you the story at some point when I didn't bump into Paul McCartney, but I did. We exchanged glances. I'll come back to that another day.
Great. Is it as good as my story about meeting Tom Baker in Marks and Spencer's?
Not really. But anyway, we'll hang that one over for another day.
Righto.
There was one by 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah.
Which I quite liked. I mean, they're a band that a little bit outside of the sphere of what I normally like, but I've got a lot of time for 9 Inch Nails. But the track I'm going to put on this week's addition to the Spotify list is one by Idlewild, and it's called a modern way of letting go. Good.
All right. Is that it?
Yeah, it is, mate. Yeah, I shall catch up with you soon.
Yeah, I'm going to cut the grass.
Good work.
Laters.
Bye.
Bye. Sideways was created by Graham Landy and Martin Pankhurst. If you want to read more about our work or sort through the extensive archive of past episodes, just visit grahamlandy-wellbeing.co.uk/sideways-podcast. You can follow us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram at Sideways Podcast, and you can email us if you have a question or if there's something you'd like us to cover. But most of all, we want to tell you how grateful we are that you come and listen, and we ask that if you've enjoyed what you've heard, that you spread the word. And we'll see you next week.